Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is a video check-in about Toni Morrison. Last year, in 2020, which thankfully is last year now, I partook in a project called Toni Morrison 2020, started by Hannah at Hannah's Books, where we were going to read one novel of her 11 novels per month and discuss them on Voxer. And actually, I was thinking of doing this beforehand, and then Hannah found me and said, hey, a group of us are going to do this too. So I was really grateful to be able to join in with that group. And for the first couple of months, we had some great moving discussions, but unfortunately, coronavirus kind of did us in. So I'm grateful for the beginning of the year with them, at least. And from there, I continued along with reading Morrison's 11 novels throughout the rest of the year, as well as a memoir written by four professors about her works at the end of the year as well. So now I figured, since I've read all of this stuff throughout the year, I should make a post to wrap it up, especially since I have a whole playlist devoted to author backlists, and I've read Morrison's backlist of novels. That being said, this is going to be pretty rambly, I think. I didn't, script anything out. For a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, I think it's just my MO to mostly ramble. I mean, I do some scripted videos, but I mostly ramble on this channel. And also, I read these 12 books throughout the last 12 months, so, I'm not necessarily, all that fresh, at least in terms of in-depth commentary on all of them, but I will leave links to all of my Goodreads reviews down below. I also thought, just to start us off right now, I'll do a quick slideshow of all of the covers of Toni Morrison's novels, right here. Okay, so from there I thought I'd just go through the 11 novels and then end with the memoir and give some quick thoughts of my remembrances of reading them, and maybe I'll also just start generally with how insightful this project was to be able to dive so deep into Morrison's writing. She is such a lyrical writer. She's a challenging writer. She, writes about very complicated and sometimes hurtful subjects, and often in a very few amount of pages. She really just sort of dips us in and takes us out again by making these complex interior characters, mostly African Americans, dealing with the world they were presented with, usually in mid-century, 20th century, and sometimes in other eras as well. Her first two books are certainly among her most famous, The Bluest Eye and Sula. I think The Bluest Eye was the first book to really look at the idea of the messages that black people in this country were fed about beauty and about how they could never be seen as truly beautiful or truly human because of their physical differences from white people, and the effect that that has on people and how they treat each other within their own families and communities. And Sula, I've talked about a lot on this channel because I read it in college and felt rather guilty about not remembering much of it. And I'm so glad that I finally reread it. It's a powerful novel. I think this is like one of her first characters. She writes a lot of female characters who break the mold. Like, there's a lot of conservative societies in Morrison's books, and in response, there's a lot of female characters who are sort of trying to find their own way. And Sula, I think, is one of them. But I have to say, maybe Morrison's later books caught my attention more than her earlier ones, but the first one that really did was Song of Solomon, her third book. This was told by her first male narrator, and maybe I thought about this too much because Morrison actually wrote about it in an intro to the edition I read about just how unusual it was for her to try to get into a male perspective, which actually I thought that the male point of view was much more linear and much easier to follow than her female character, so maybe that helped. She's following her character Milkman, who is the son of a well-respected enough colored man in the community, but we also go back into the past for his family and discuss such issues as what racism in the post-slavery world did to the black community, because it could be incredibly brutal. This is also the first novel, I believe, where Morrison talks about explicit racism rather than implicit racism, and particularly violent racism. She talks specifically about the death of Emmett Till, which happens during the course of this novel, and one of Milkman's friends, Guitar, he joins a vigilante group, and because Guitar, seeing this violence perpetrated against black people, decides that, well, white people are just brutes, and the only way to stop this is an eye for an eye. So every time a black person is killed, the group goes off and kills a white person. So Morrison dives into that sort of revenge plot and the cost of that as well. Although, and a final thing about the Song of Solomon that I guess I'll just say briefly is that she couldn't keep away from her trailblazing female characters, and Milkman's aunt, Pilot, was that one in the book that she really just leapt off the page. Morrison's fourth book is Tar Baby, and I'm calling this my second favorite of her novels. I think it's weird. It's not one of her most well-known ones, so I guess that would be surprising, and maybe it's just, you know, you get these biases stuck in your head when you read the books that I maybe is informing me too much, but then again, I really enjoyed the experience of reading this book. It was a very insular little novel, at least especially in the very beginning. It takes place on an island between a very small cast of characters, so it was almost like a play, like, you know, you could adapt it into like a screenplay or something, or anyway, the main characters are this white couple who live on the island, very much taking advantage of black labor to live in comfort, especially of their butler and their maid. But one thing they do is they've taken the niece of this butler and maid, and they've basically been a patron to her and paid for her to go abroad and to study fashion and education, other types of education in Paris and so forth. So J. Dean, that character, is a specific sort of African American, I guess, that she's very much informed by this white-leaning education and even her affection for these white people. Although that's challenged by an infiltrator into their group, a man who sneaks onto the island. He is in a bit of trouble himself, and he's a black man, and immediately sets off all of the stereotypes about the dangerous black man vagrant in their society. But he challenges J. Dean about her life and about her community. Although personally, I think I was more taken with J. Dean's aunt, Undine, who was trying to hold the family together. You know, she could tell see the limitations of her employers and of her niece and that sort of thing. And there was just something so down to earth about Undine that stuck with me. So I just thought there was a lot of interesting commentary in this one, but I really just liked the setup, like that small island setup, although later J. Dean does leave with this man to go to his hometown and see a very different black American experience. From there, Morrison's fifth book is arguably her most famous. It's Beloved. Beloved is a slave narrative, but it seems very limiting to say that about it. It's based off of a real story, though, about a fugitive slave. There were some, you know, white people hot on her heels, and when it was apparent that they were going to, you know, catch her and her children, she murders her children, at least a couple of them. And this is something that Morrison came up across, this story, and she decided to dramatize it and fictionalize it to go into why a mother would do that. So I feel like, and I think a lot of commentators and reviewers feel like it's less, in a way, a story about slavery. It's more of a story about motherhood. And when you're a mother and your children are caught against this world that will never see them as human beings, what is your choice? What are your options, even if, they're the most horrible thing ever? I mean, it's just such a rock and a hard place, and such travesty. I mean, to me, in a way, the slavery comes through with what could be the ghost of the child she kills, beloved, who comes to live with her, with the woman who... Anyway, let me backtrack and say the woman in this story who killed her daughter, beloved, is named Sethi. And several years later, an possible apparition of beloved comes to live with her mother, Sethi, and also a younger sister, Denver, and just turns their lives inside out. Sethi is just embroiled in both guilt but also determination that she, did the right thing, and it just turns into this huge loop, self-destructive loop that, could destroy her life and the life of her daughter and of her lover. There's just a lot of back and forth opinions about what happened, and they also still have to live in this community, which by this point, 10 years later, the Civil War has ended, so they're all free, but they're still, living in a broader community of people with opinions and that sort of thing. So it's a very difficult novel. It's perhaps kind of the most stream of consciousness inside your head sort of novel about these tragic things that happened, very dark and deep things that happened to this family and that this mother chose to do as some of the only agency she could have over her life. It's a challenging novel, but I think I can see, the power of it. It's just so apparent that this is the reason I think this is her most well-known novel. Things are slightly less intense and infamous, I guess, from here. Morrison's sixth novel is called Jazz. I don't think it's incredibly well-known. There's a couple things I remember the most about it. I remember that the idea of jazz was like a character in the novel. It's very experimental sort of writing in that way. It takes place in the 50s in Harlem with the black community there. Some of the main characters are in this sort of almost soap opera-ish love triangle that goes really bad, where a man kills his much younger mistress, and it's something that haunted me a lot about how this young girl who is coming into her own age and, just trying to love and be loved, is sort of treated like a pariah for, being the mistress and breaking up a family. And it's just something that I struggled with a lot in the novel, and I think the characters did too, especially because, she was killed. So at the end of the day, there has to be some sort of reckoning, at least between all of the living characters, about what happened. The next novels are Paradise and Love, which I think are also somewhat similar. In both of these novels, it's predominantly taking place within another conservative African-American community where Morrison looks at the lives of rather eccentric women on the outskirts. I don't think they're ever going to be her most famous novels, but I really appreciated these sorts of characters and always just kind of getting to push the boundaries a little bit about what's accepted in society, especially when Morrison is starting to write about, I guess, the advent of civil rights, and there's generational differences in the community about how to respond to things. And then we have these eccentric women doing their own thing on the outskirts. From there we have A Mercy, which is my personal favorite Morrison novel. That's what I'm going to say. I've already said it in other places, so I'm going to say it now. This is actually another slavery narrative of a sort, except it takes place 200 years before Beloved, before America is even a country. And that's part of the reason why I love it so much. It's like a mythology for the country, a mythology that we don't get to hear much about, but is based in a truth that's also part of American history about who was here and what they did. We have everyone from European settlers and African slaves to indentured servants from Europe as well, like people with different levels of freedom, women and men and that sort of thing as well. I mean, there is somewhat of a plot to this about, a woman who gets sick and a young slave girl named Florence who has to try and save her, and she has her own stuff going on. There is another story in here about a fraught mother and daughter relationship with less supernatural stuff in this story going on, but we get to see why Florence feels betrayed by her mother, and at the end we get to see why the mother had reasons for doing what she did. It's a fascinating story too, because just the idea of slavery and race were so different in the 1600s, when people had less contact with one another across race lines, and so that comes through. And another thing Morrison does in this story, and also in Beloved, is talk about slavery and bondage as a personal thing too. Like, it's not just something that others force on you, it's a state of mind, and how do you get past that or beyond that. And in a way, her other characters have to deal with it too, because they're dealing with being like basically abandoned in the wilds far from home, or they're indentured servants, which really is another form of bondage, that you're working for no pay for what could be years and years and lifetimes. So it's just a fascinating foray into a type of a pre-American existence that we don't get to see a lot of. And once again, Morrison writes all of these characters with so much care and I think a lot of empathy, and I was very impressed. Finally, Morrison's penultimate novel is Home. It's another novel that returns to the 50s, and it deals a lot with the idea of a home for African Americans at this time, specifically having to do with being veterans of a war during a racist time when white people still don't want to treat you as equals, and also with regards to the medical institution when black people were used as guinea pigs, and we're following two siblings along in this story. I don't think it's Morrison's most powerful novel, but obviously there's some important things at play in here. And finally, we come to Morrison's final novel, which I still have in hardback, is God Help the Child. And I do think this is my least favorite of her novels. I think the writing is the weakest. I mean, this is Morrison, so her writing is still fine, but fine for normal people, not fine for Morrison. I thought there was some facile writing in this. I think it's interesting that this was a novel that took place in the modern day, and I mean, when she wrote it in 2015, and it almost felt like she was out of step with the time. Like, it didn't seem like her millennial characters really lived in our day and age. Maybe I'm being too sensitive with that. There's also a theme of pedophilia that runs through here that I think works for one of the main characters and not so much for the other one. She's dealing with such topics that, I mean, it almost goes full circle to a Bluest Eye. The main character, Bride, is born incredibly dark-skinned, and because of that, her light-skinned mother treats her basically almost like a stranger or another, and her father even leaves the family. So it's going back to that idea of, you're not beautiful, you're not really human because you're this other color. Although it also, like Tar Baby, kind of goes into exoticism. Like, Jadine was the exotic black person in Tar Baby, and Bride turns out to be exotic in the 21st century when, people look at her skin and say it's beautiful, but they still say it in a way that it's like fetishizing it. So yeah, there's some similarities there, and I feel like Morrison did a better job of making the characters in those other novels feel more real and deal with those issues more complexly. So this one didn't do as much for me, but overall the experience of reading Morrison was a success, so I could deal with this somewhat dud. And finally, before my battery goes completely kaput on me, I will give a few quick thoughts on this book. This is a memoir, the Toni Morrison Book Club by Judah Bennett, Winifred Brown Glaude, Cassandra Jackson, and Piper Kendricks Williams, who are professors at a university in New Jersey together. They all love, and some of them teach, Morrison, so they wanted to get together to do something about her works. It's not a traditional academic sort of work at all. It is really essays about the American experience and how Morrison remains relevant, especially in terms of violence against black people that still goes on to this day. They look specifically at Beloved and Song of Solomon and The Bluest Eye, and even A Mercy, which I was happy about. Those are the ones I think that crop up the most in here, but it's definitely not a thorough or academic review of her works. It's actually a lot about these four people and their own lives and what they go through. Three of them are African American women, and one is a gay white man, and what they came to in approaching her stories. and reminding us that Morrison was one of the first writers, certainly one of the most famous first writers, who was a black woman unapologetically writing for a black audience. I mean, anyone can read these stories, obviously, but I think there's a bias that, especially in the early days, where, we expect our characters to be white, we expect the frame of reference to be white, about white experiences and white biases, and, in Morrison's novels, they're about black experiences and black biases, and they gave some well-needed attention to that world, and these characters grapple with that and relate them to events in their own lives and in the broader, American fabric still going on today. I really liked it. I mean, it's not academic, but I thought there was something really strong about just these people grappling with Morrison and their real lives, and doing it as a group project too, which really brought in like push and pull between people and their beliefs. So it felt like society responding in a way, a very small sliver, but still something. So I would suggest this. You don't even have to have read Morrison's books, I think, to get a lot out of this, because, these essays are a lot about their own lives and real events too. Having read her novels, it gives that extra oomph, like, oh, I know what she's talking about here, or he's talking about or referencing here. So I would suggest, doing your own Toni Morrison reading project of reading her novels first, but either way will work. So that about covers it for me now. It feels like a strange time to be doing this video because the public world is encroaching on us in bigger ways than usual with what happened in these past few days in the Capitol in the U.S., with insurgents storming the Capitol building while Congress was, counting up the electoral vote for president. It's a time to be talking about Toni Morrison, I would think, because Morrison, certainly through her experiences and her novels, understood white supremacy as it related to the black community, and all of us had to deal with it relating to our lives as these terrorists, stormed the Capitol. So it does seem like a good time to be reflective and to remind ourselves of the issues and of the complexities of American history, and Morrison certainly seems like a good place to start with that, although I hope I don't sound too trite when saying that. It's just been on my mind, and the writers of the memoir I just pointed out already did a great job of threading in Morrison's novels into what's happening and continues to happen past her death. I think a lot of us turn to literature in trying times, and I would love to hear what people have to say about reading Morrison during these times, or any times, frankly. She was such a gifted writer. Anyway, I should be back imminently on this channel to do a Friday Reads about some more recent reading that I've done, so stay tuned for that. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.